In this video, we'll take a look at configuring the plugins feature in FreeNAS and doing first-time setup. The plugins feature extends PCBSD's PBI system to FreeNAS and allows for the installation of third-party applications. Popular add-ons include the Transmission BitTorrent client, the Firefly Media Server, Mini DLNA, and others. In this case, we'll be starting with a FreeNAS installation that already has users and volumes configured. For help getting off the ground, feel free to refer to our previous video on setting up volumes and shares. Plugins are compatible with installs based on either UFS or ZFS. Our demonstration will be using a ZFS volume, but we'll take note of the differences when they come up. The first step in getting FreeNAS ready for plugins is to go into the Storage tab, View Volumes, and create two new datasets. The first dataset is going to hold the jail and the installed binaries. The dataset must be over 2 GB in total size, as this is the minimum amount of space required for the FreeBSD OS in the jail. It's generally a good idea to allow for even more space than this, as the dataset will also contain logs and the installed versions of the plugins. The second dataset acts as a repository for the PBI files. It may be created as a nested dataset of the jail dataset, which can help with overall space management. The downside of this layout is that deleting the jail dataset will take the repository with it. I'll be creating it in parallel with the jail's dataset. If you have the goal of managing space jointly for both datasets, it is possible to nest them under the same parent dataset, which you only use to govern the allocated size for both together. Under UFS, the analogous procedure is to either use the web console and the makedir command to create the target directories, or create them through the GUI in a share on the UFS volume. Regardless of your particular implementation, it's worth allocating this dataset a reasonable amount of space, especially if you plan on using this dataset as the target of your torrent downloads or your media storage. Later on, we'll look at creating mount points that exist outside the jail, but are also accessible from within. Before we actually initialize the plugins jail, we need to set a default route and configure a network interface. This will ensure that both the FreeNAS system and the jail are able to access and be accessed by the Internet at large, an important step for exposing transmission to the BitTorrent trackers and peers that it needs to download media. For those taking this step, double-check security settings on all your shared data. For those who want to only use FreeNAS on their local network and aren't going to use transmission or any other Internet-enabled software, this step can be skipped. Now that we have an interface as well as a place to put the jail, we can go ahead and get the jail PBI from the SourceForge page. Make sure you get the correct PBI for your version of FreeNAS, as 32-bit plugins won't work with 64-bit FreeNAS, and vice versa. The jail initialization is very straightforward. Under Services, Plugins, Settings, we are prompted with a place to temporarily place the PBI file while it is being installed. The default option for our volume is fine. Step 2 of 3 prompts us for paths to the datasets or volumes we created before. The first one is going to be the path of the jail dataset, or directory for UFS users. The jail name can be whatever you like. The jail requires an IP address on your network. Generally, this should be assigned from the 192.168 block, but if your network has different requirements, you should set this accordingly. Usually it will have to match whatever format your FreeNAS installation is using. Both my FreeNAS install and my jail have addresses in the net10 block based on my current network configuration. Internal addresses will only be available on the internal network. If you want the jail to be accessible to the larger internet, you will have to have configured your interface and default gateway. The net mask should match whatever is assigned to you by DHCP and is visible under the Network tab in your network summary. The vast majority of common internal networks use a 16 net mask. The second path should be to the other dataset or directory that's going to be used for the installation of plugins. The last step is to upload and install the plugins PBI downloaded from the SourceForge page. Once everything is properly configured, go ahead and enable the plugin service. Once this is turned on, we can switch to the Plugins section of the Services tab and install plugins. I'm going to install Transmission from the PBI on SourceForge. Once we hit upload, the plugin will automatically install, and all that's left to do is enable it in the list, then configure it to suit our needs. To access the plugin's jail directly, we can use the web shell console. The command jls will show us the jails currently operating on the FreeNAS host and reveal their ID numbers to us. If you disable and re-enable the plugin service, check with jls to see if your JID has changed. The command jexec followed by the JID and the shell of your choice will enable you to operate a shell in the jail from the browser. The plugin's jail is a specialized implementation of the FreeBSD jail system and does not listen for SSH connections. It is best to use the web shell in situations requiring direct access to the jail. In the following plugins demonstration video, we'll configure Transmission, Firefly, and MiniDLNA to work together, demonstrate the proper procedure for mounting directories for access by the jail and host system, and show how to create an automated pipeline for streaming and obtaining media.